Welcome to a virtual exhibit between me, Bill Brooks, Executive Director of the Sheldon Museum, and Miriam Adams, a Vermont watercolor and graphite artist from Heinsberg, Vermont. Because of COVID restrictions and social distancing, I am broadcasting from the gallery at the Sheldon Museum, and Miriam is broadcasting from her home in Heinsberg. This is the first such broadcasting experience for both of us, so let's have a good time and be flexible. The Sheldon Museum is a member of the Vermont Curators Group, and we agreed to participate this year in a group-themed technology exhibit. Miriam titled her portion, Drawing on the Past, and her work features a variety of everyday household objects: scissors and shears, tools, timepieces, sewing equipment, yarn and knitting needles, buttons and hand fans, ladies' gloves, garments, and ribbons. Historically, many of these items were once technological innovations. She places these familiar objects in conversation with natural forms: flowers, feathers, fruit, leaves, and stone, often with humor, sometimes philosophically. She depicts conversations between the natural and the man-made. As a history and art museum, the Sheldon celebrates a combination of personal stories and artistic creativity. And that is what this conversation with Miriam is all about. So let's get started. And pardon me if I occasionally look down referring to my notes. And Miriam may be referring to her notes as well. Miriam, tell us about your youth and your first visit to an art museum and your later choice to study art at Barnard, and how you came to specialize in graphite and watercolor on paper.
Well, I was born in New York City, and then we moved around. It was in the 50s when everybody moved around a lot. We lived in various towns in New Jersey and New York. My goal in life as a child was to get back to New York. I loved the city. So when it came time to go to college, I went to Barnard College, which unfortunately didn't even have an fine arts program. But I wanted to be in New York, and I wanted a broad education. So I actually studied art history there, but they did have some excellent art instructors over at Columbia, and I was able to study with them. My first love in life was ballet, which naturally meant that the first artist I liked was Degas. And as far as museums went, my favorite museum was always the Metropolitan New York. And I loved to go there both for the art and for the fact that my grandmother and I would have tea in their beautiful restaurant, which is no longer a restaurant, with the fountains in the middle. And it was just a terrific experience altogether. So I really loved doing that. When I got to the point in my life where I realized there was no way I was going to be a ballerina, I switched over to art. And I did oil painting for a long time. I did a little bit of sculpture. Eventually, everything was looking like drawing, so I just completely switched over to drawing. And I've been working in graphite and watercolor on paper since.
Oh, great.
And that's what I've done my whole life.
And what brought you to Vermont?
My husband had a one-year clerkship with a federal judge in Burlington. And so we were trying to decide. We were living in Philadelphia at that point. He was in law school. And I didn't want to stay in Philadelphia. So we decided we'd just come to Vermont for a year, sort of on a lark, and we just never left.
Well, we're glad that you're still here. So let's begin the tour of the museum using the groupings that Miriam has pre-selected. You chose to open the exhibit with a piece called Birdsong, and why was that?
Oh, that drawing has a nice juxtaposition of natural and man-made objects, which is very prevalent in my work. And therefore, it seemed like a good introduction.
And the first grouping that you chose that depicts wrenches and pliers, which I believe were inspired by your father's tools.
Yes.
Did your dad have a different way of communicating? Was he hard as stone or have a big heart?
My father was a very gentle person. He was a chemical engineer and was very good with his hands, very gentle. And those tools are all his tools, which I came into my possession after he passed away. And he was a very concise and scientific in the way he spoke, although he was also had a tremendous sense of humor and creativity. So the conversation, there's one drawing, I think it's called The Conversation, which shows one wrench with a pretty simple ribbon and another one with a rather swirly one. And that could be my parents having a conversation. My mother was a musician and way more flowery and flowing in her speech. There's also one with pliers holding a heart-shaped stone, and it's holding that stone very, very lovingly and keeping it very safe.
Well, the next grouping of skeleton fans suggests that beauty lingers. There's a daffodil and a bird's eye, a blue bird's eye, even though other parts of the pieces are transitory. Is there any message here that love lasts following the wedding?
Well, that's what we hope. The bones, the bones on the wedding fan, I believe is the one you're talking about. There are roses sprouting out of one of the bones, which is a symbol of love, and very often at a wedding. And that is one's hope, is that it will last as the rest of life goes past. I've always been interested in the effects of decay and time on objects, and the fact that things still remain beautiful even when they're not intact and at their perfection, at their perfect newness. I think that's a concept that's much more prevalent in Asian art, as are fan shapes for that matter. There certainly is a tradition in Western art of memento mori paintings that speak about the passage of time. But I think the real decay and interest in objects themselves is more Asian. But I think it's very interesting to see what time does to things, to people, and to objects, and that they not only are still interesting, but sometimes they're more interesting.
Well, you and I have known each other for 20 years, and we certainly have seen some changes in our physical appearance. Hopefully, we still remain interesting. The next
I think perhaps age helps you to appreciate those things.
Yes, in my case, it does. The knitting needles is the next group, and they're often matched with yarn. So what tales are these settings telling us?
Well, I think the word yarn is a great word in that it has the double meaning of the physical yarn that you knit with as well as a story. And that's often been in my mind when I deal with yarn. I'm trying to think. I never remember the titles of my drawings, which is kind of difficult now as I'm trying to tell you about them. But I'm trying to think. There's one I know with a feather writing. And of course, a feather traditionally has been a writing instrument. And it's writing a yarn, but it's writing it with the yarn. And then some of them are just sort of whimsical. I just love the pirouette, the way the yarn is sort of twirling around the needle. And there's another one where the yarn is looped over a horizontal needle, and that one I just was whimsical, and I just enjoyed looking at it and drawing it.
And there's another a group that I'm particularly fond of. It's a housekeeping group of keys dangling from ribbons with a suggestion of home security and home comfort.
Well, keys are used to keep your home secure. And in housekeeping, the 4 keys create an enclosed space, a nice safe space, which is what we hope for in our homes. I actually found the key in my daughter's house. So you could sort of say that I was hoping that her home would be safe and secure for her and her family. The other key is hanging from a ribbon on a piece of wood, which again combines natural and man-made objects. I think of that almost like as a key to what I do in that combination of items, and also in the use of the ribbon, which is a motif that just goes all through my work. I've been obsessed with ribbons since I was a little girl and had them in my hair and had them in ballet. And ribbons are a way of making a line that is both, has more substance than just a pencil line. It can be any width and can have all kinds of color. And so it's a very good way to express rhythm and motion for me. And it just comes out in drawings. It has been for over 40 years.
And do you,
sometimes it goes away and then it comes back.
And do you ever wear colorful ribbons in your own hair?
Not at this age.
Well, the next is a pin cushion grouping. And the more aged one of the pin cushions featured belonged to your grandfather. And this one is trailing sawdust and embedded with pins, while others suggest women's work, but sewing is not limited by sex. And certainly your mother sewed at some point.
No, actually, my mother was the world's worst seamstress.
Oh.
She did not sew. She embroidered a little bit, but she could not sew. My father sewed on his own buttons. Again, he was pretty good with his hands. My grandfather did all the handiwork in that family, and his father had been a tailor, not a classy tailor, but he had been a tailor back in Europe. And I guess I was the next person who did the sewing and handiwork in the family after my grandfather. That pincushion is really old, and I find it very interesting that it was stuffed with the sawdust. I just had never seen anything like that before. Then there's the drawing with the nest with the pincushion in the middle, and that switches to women's work, which I believe sewing is more traditional in the home. And the pincushion is in the center of the nest, just like it might be in the center of the home. The nest is somewhat coming apart with age again, another motif that comes back. But hopefully the pincushion and the love in the middle will hold it all together.
Sure. Well, then there's a grouping of pinking shears with the serrated edges. For me, they're a little off-putting, but I believe helpful pinking shears are when you're cutting fabric. What do the chewed up letters signify in one of the images? And in another, the 2 shears that are engaging in conversation. Is it confrontation or is it capitulation? And there's also one of a tape measure entwined in a pair of tailor's shears. Is that freedom or restriction? Or whatever interpretation you want to give us.
Well, pinking shears do look like they have teeth, so I can see why they might be a little off-putting, but they're very useful to keep fabric from fraying. I'm trying to think. The first one you mentioned
was the chewed up letters.
Oh, the chewed up letters, yes, which is one of my favorite. The letters actually spell peace of mind, P-I-E-C-E, if you were to put it back together. The pinking shears have chewed them up, and in chewing up pieces of one's mind. They've also chewed up peace of mind, P-E-A-C-E. So it's a double entendre that I don't usually explain, but that's what's there. The two scissors that are confronting each other, it's ambiguous. They could be conversing or they could be having some sort of altercation. And I like ambiguity, so that works for me. The drawing with the tape measure has words on it. We tailor our myths until they feel like they fit and become our truths. Those are words that I came up with. And what that drawing is about, and it's one of my favorites too, is the fact that we do alter and change around and figure out what our histories and memories are in order to create a story that we can live with about ourselves.
That's true. Many novels prove that. So, then there's a series, I call it the clothing series, where you identify your mother, which you've just spoken about, as a pianist who did not like to sew. But this image is of an embroidered kimono she made, in your words, for her first child. Was that you or a sibling?
Well, I was her only child.
Okay.
So she made it for me. And the reason I wanted to combine it with the Schumann Kindersingen music was because she also taught me piano. And well, she tried to teach me that piece. And I still try to play it. I'm not a very good pianist, but I very much enjoy playing. So those were two gifts she gave me. She gave me the little kimono when I was born, and she gave me the love of music for the rest of my life.
And we hope that sometime during this interview, we'll be playing the Schumann scenes from your childhood that you've mentioned. And then there's a glove grouping of three, and it includes one glove is holding a ball of yarn, another is holding a long snap card, and a third, which is a pair of gloves that go to the elbow, has bright red flowers embroidered on the gloves, but it's holding, cupped in the two gloves, is a fading rose. Is there any suggestion here that life slips away, perhaps depicted in the fading rose, or is there other interpretations that you want to share with us?
Well, I would say that's pretty accurate for the last drawing, because the rose, those are old gloves, and they're embroidered with roses. And the rose they're holding is a pretty faded rose. And the hope is that we can hold on to the things we love as time slips by. I love drawing gloves in general because they are basically hands, but they're hands that you can manipulate in a way you could never manipulate human hands. And so they're very helpful for expressing ideas or emotions. Well, and they also retain in their creases and in their folds, they retain memories of life and of how they were used in life.
Sure. Well, a little aside here. Here is an assembly of a white umbrella clinched by white gloves. There are actually three different gloves that you created 20 years ago. And I purchased at an odd auction benefiting Frog Hollow for the Vermont State Craft Center. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I did a number of sculptures with stuffed gloves. But I get tired of doing sculpture. You know, after I do a few, I've had enough. Whereas I can draw every day of my life. In fact, I do draw almost every day of my life, and I never get tired of doing that. I love drawing.
Favorite piece.
But I do like the umbrella, and I enjoy doing those.
So, well, Miriam, this has been fun. Thanks for sharing your life and your art with us. And tell us, have you enjoyed your experience so far with the Sheldon Museum?
It's been delightful. You, Bill, and the women you work with have all been wonderful to work with and so helpful, and especially in a time that I know is not easy for anybody.
Well, Associate Director Mary Manley and
Yeah.
Rossini, who's here for the summer, having spent the last 4 years with us as a Middlebury College intern, have thoroughly enjoyed knowing you and learning more about you and your art.
Well, no, it's a lovely experience for me. Thank you all.
Well, thank you. Well, we hope Miriam's exhibit and drawings, Drawing on the Past, will soon be available for in-person viewing at the museum. It all depends upon COVID. So keep watch on the museum's website for updates about if we're able to reopen. In the meantime, you should know that Miriam's work is available for sale through the museum. So just give us a call, and hopefully if we are able to open to the public, you'll see all these wonderful drawings in person. So thanks for viewing, and I didn't ask you about the drawing behind you. Maybe you want to just comment.
Oh, this is actually quite an old drawing of iris that are arrayed in a fan shape.
Sure. Are they?
So there's, you know, there's certain motifs that just go through my work and keep coming out now and then. This is a very old drawing, but it has that fan configuration.
Okay.
I love Asian art. I mean, and I love its simplicity, and it's been I don't know if I would say it was an influence. Probably, yeah, it must be an influence because I've always loved it, and I like the simplicity and directness.
Well, you favor fans, and I want you to know that the three of us here at the museum are fans of you.
That's lovely. Thank you.